Right, thank you very much, everybody. It's 2 o'clock. This meeting will be called to order. I'd like to start this meeting off with a moment of silence for quiet reflection and meditation. And we think of all our colleagues of the Muslim faith celebrating Ramadan. Thank you. Welcome to everybody in attendance as well as on MS Teams. I'm going to ask if to introduce ourselves, starting with the members of the committee. I'll start with myself. I'm Christopher Fly. I'm the chairperson of this committee. Can I ask the members online to introduce themselves, please?
Good afternoon, colleagues. Gillian Bosman. I am standing in as an alternate for Member Bartman, who tendered an apology.
Good afternoon, Chair. Also joining online, it's Cameron Dugmore. And I would also just like to ask at the end of the meeting if we could just have an item under general in terms of our request to discuss the legislation to amend the provincial constitution regarding the Environmental Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will then ask Mr. Hendrickson to introduce himself, please.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. My name is Michael Hendrickson. I'm the Provincial Electoral Officer for the IEC in the Western Cape.
Thank you very much, sir. Because there are members online, I'm just going to go through the rules of engagement for virtual meetings very quickly. Members, if you could mute yourselves at the beginning of the meeting. If you can please flag points of order in the chat function of MS Teams. All videos and audios must be switched off to improve the quality of the connection. If an official is speaking, then we put on their mic and video, but I don't think there are any officials online. I think it's just you, Mr. Abrams, sir. It's just you.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Without further ado, I will hand over to the IEC for the latest of the 2024 elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you again for the opportunity to make this presentation to the Standing Committee. We appreciate it. Yes, I will briefly outline in terms of our preparations for 2024, which is the purpose then for this presentation. So just in terms of legislation, just the overview, the 2024 Electoral Amendments Bill was adopted by the National Parliament within the extended timelines as set by the Constitutional Court. As members are aware, the matter before the court that to be decided on was the participation of independent candidates in national and provincial elections. As at the current state, the IEC is still awaiting the finalization of that legislation that will regulate primarily the issue of candidate nomination, which is the issue then of independent candidates and participating. The Commission is in record, Chairperson, that delays in finalizing the legislation will impact on our preparations and the delivery of the NPE 2024 and the concomitant timelines. At this stage, Chairperson, I therefore cannot go into the specifics around what would be the requirements for candidate nomination, seeing that the matter is still with the President and the President's decision on whether either to sign the bill, send it back to Parliament, or even take it to the Concourt himself. So at this stage, I would rather not want to then engage on what are those particular requirements, etc., because that may change as and when the matter is finalized. We're also aware that a number of groups have indicated that they may challenge the bill in its present form. So that leaves it up in the air. But what we do know, Chairperson, is that there will be 3 ballots, unlike in the past, given the fact that we need independence and to cater for independence. So typically what that will mean is that you will have a provincial legislature ballot as for this particular house, and there will be 9 different ones because each province will have their own ballot paper for their respective provincial legislatures. And then when it comes to the National Assembly, the Constitution provides that there will be a maximum of 400, and that is where we are at the moment. And then in terms of the legislation, 200 of the seats will be divided up to reflect the representation from the 9 regions. So in other words, there'll be a set number of regional representatives going to National Assembly, and then you have a national compensatory list, which is also made up of for 200 seats. So that in broad is the scheme as it is. As I indicated, we don't know specifically how the requirements will pan out, etc. But we do know that independents will be allowed to contest in national and provincial elections, and that is where we are now in terms of awaiting the final requirements in that particular regard. Moving on in terms of our preparations, just some background with regard to our outreach program of the province, of the IEC in the province. We provide civic and democracy education, which in a sense is broken into sort of 3 phases or stages, if you'd like. You have the broader democracy education with regard to the overall electoral systems, participation, and the setup of our democracy. Then you go into a narrower focus on voting education, which is really around the requirements to vote, etc. And then balloting education, which is then closer to the election, which is around the actual number of ballots and informing the public in terms of how to participate in the particular election when they get into the voting booth. In the past financial year, we in the province have conducted 5,543 events across the province in terms of our civic and democracy education. The target which is set for the province in terms of the national, our national organizations, APP, broken down was 4,240. So we have exceeded the target by over 1,000, more than 1,000 events. And going into the current financial year, in the lead up then to the NPE for next year, we're hoping to at least double that particular target. In other words, go to at least 8,000 and then not be limited to the actual target, but actually exceed it as we did in the last financial year. The IEC also runs a national schools democracy program, which is rolled out across the whole country. And within this province, we visit schools, IEC teams visit schools, and we've done close to 200 schools in the last financial year, 2022 to 23. The final number is still being collated because the financial year just ended and we're still finalizing our final report, but we know that it's close to over 200 schools that we've attended in this province. In the previous financial year of 2021-22, we've been to 212 schools. And this sometimes happens in collaboration with the Department of Home Affairs when they are going to do IDs and delivering IDs, especially to those that are due to write matric. As members will know, that while you have to be 18 in order to vote, we register a citizen from the age of 16. So we will register you. And as and when you become 18, you automatically then get enrolled onto the voters roll. Besides the voter registration that we do at our schools, as well as voter education, which is primarily done during school breaks and the life orientation subject period, we also assist the Western Cape Education Department in the conducting of RCL elections. That is your representative council for learners. It's the old sort of SRC type institutions within the schools. So we do that across the province, and we assist both in terms of at the school level, at district level, and even at the provincial level for these RCLs. And I must say that we have a very good working relationship with the WCED when it comes to our accessing to our schools for the purpose of voter education and engaging with our young people at schools. The IEC chairperson has also launched a national tertiary institution campaign. This is aimed at tertiary institutions, our universities and TVET colleges around the country, because again, as we know, we are looking to increase the participation of young people in our electoral processes. The institution or the institution campaign, or TIC, was launched nationally in March, and we in the province had a launch on the 5th of April at the Bellville campus of the Seaput University. This is part of our overall and continuous engagement with young people at campuses. We will have joint events on campuses. We also provide voter registration opportunities for young people on our campuses, and we hope to extend our engagements on campuses through the student structures and with the relevant student advisory bodies that are on our campuses. We also recently in March had a thought leadership seminar where the theme was on on youth participation. That particular seminar was really broken into two parts, Chairperson. The first session was basically where we were listening to what young people was telling us. Because too often we want to tell young people what the problem is instead of us first listening from their perspective. What are the issues? What are the stumbling blocks? And how to overcome those. And that was a very fruitful session, and we hope to take further engagements with a number of youth organizations that were also present at that particular seminar. So we have an overall strategy around youth participation from the IEC. Ultimately, however, when it comes to participation, the IEC can ensure that all our processes are put in place, the opportunities are there, but it ultimately also cannot only be the responsibility of the IEC. We rely on our other stakeholders to assist us, and also the contestants, be it politicians, parties, candidates, to also play their part in ensuring that they create the atmosphere for people to want to participate through their election manifestos, track records, etc., and being responsive to the questions raised by their constituents. We have a number of general stakeholder engagements that we conduct, and we intend to continue to conduct. Your PLCs, this is your political liaison committees, your party liaison committees, as it was in the past, where we will liaise with represented political parties. You have one at the national level in each province, and in each municipality you'll also have a PLC, and we engage and consult with political parties on where we are and the processes we will be following. We also have sector-specific engagements. I had recently had an engagement with the disability sector where 24 organizations joined us online, where we engage with specific issues around the participation of persons in that particular sector. What are those challenges and how we can overcome them? Also then NGOs and community-based organizations such as youth organizations that we engage and will continue to engage with. Key stakeholders, I've already had some meetings with in preparation for next year with SAP's Provincial Commissioner and his team, including the head of legal services in SAPS, specifically also as it relates to electoral offences and breaches of the Code of Conduct. Because as you know, the South African Police Service provides a statutory function in terms of assisting and securing our voting stations when we are conducting elections. I've also had a meeting with the Director of Public Prosecutions for the province. I've also had a meeting with the head of correctional services in the province. As members will recall, when it comes to national and provincial elections, prisoners can also vote. And we have to put in place then arrangements for us to go and register prisoners, and then on election day for them to be able to have the opportunity to also cast their vote. That means that we work very closely with the prison services to ensure that prisoners are aware of when we will be coming to register them, so that they can ensure that they have their IDs with them. And similarly also, Chairperson, when it comes to voting, we will then visit the prison. So we work very closely with the prison officials within the different prisons as it's situated across the province for that particular purpose. We then also, through the PLCs at the local level, will inform the political parties that are contesting what are the rules of engagement at our prisons, because the prison services have specific rules around campaigning or limited campaigning within the prisons, given the security mandate that they have. I previously indicated, Chairperson, that we work very closely with the Department of Home Affairs, because IDs are required both to register and to vote. And normally, I've had now a session or meeting with the acting provincial head of Home Affairs, who was recently appointed as acting manager for the province, around arrangements as they do for Home Affairs to be open during registration weekends as well as during election day, so that persons who do not have the ID can apply, or even apply to get a temporary identity certificate, which is the only alternative to the ID that can be used to cast their vote. I also have a number of engagements and will continue with municipal managers across the province, because our municipalities is one of our key stakeholders and partners when it comes to assisting the IEC, especially when it comes to infrastructure matters. And I must say that I also get a very good relationship with them, and we will continue with those particular engagements in that regard. The re-engagement of ECOC. ECOC stands for the Electoral Code of Conduct Committee. That is a committee that is chaired by the Archbishop of Cape Town and the Catholic Bishop. And it's really about ensuring that the religious fraternity have organized themselves as a sort of observer type mission, where they go and ensure that they looked at political parties, candidates primarily observe the code of conduct for elections to ensure that we have free and fair elections. So the committee is busy now re-engaging themselves, because these are obviously only come together during election time. And I'm aware that they are now setting up a meeting in the very near future. That meeting I also attend. So it's something which I also rely on, and the IEC relies on, because the religious leaders, it's an interfaith committee. We rely on their moral authority when it comes to, especially in de-escalating potential disputes or conflict areas, and also just to be there around to ensure that participants keep in line with the code of conduct. We also engage regularly with the media and community radio around ensuring that we have communication campaigns to allow South Africans to know what the rules are around elections, voting, what are the requirements, etc. We typically also, I normally would have before the elections, a workshop with the media where we go through the sort of requirements for participation, the arrangements that we're going to put in place, and what is required to be done in terms of elections. That is also planned during the course of the later part of this financial year. Thank you, Chairperson. When it comes to the next step of preparations, we're talking delimitation. Now, this members will know that the whole country is divided up into voting districts. We have wall-to-wall voting districts, over 23,000 of them. And we started this process of reviewing our voting districts because, as you are aware, with population changes, housing developments, informal settlements springing up, a number of other cadastral issues pitching up, as well as availability of venues, etc. We normally would review the voting districts. We also have to take into account the fact that the Municipal Demarcation Board is also busy with their demarcation process. I think they've concluded the outer boundaries on the first stage, and we need to obviously take that into account, because if a municipal boundary changes, it may impact on the voting district, and we need to make those particular changes as well. But in our province, we have concluded our process of delimitation changes, and all the proposals have been presented to all the respective municipal liaison committees in the municipalities across the province. Those maps have, as we call them, been signed off and now have been submitted to our national office. In the 2021 elections, we had 1,577 voting districts. In 2023, as it currently stands, and that's why I said it's still a draft, we would have 1,573. That is 4 less. If you look at the breakdown there, we've got 67 boundary changes. This is literally where we have to realign boundaries because of either developments and cadastre, etc. Or we also include new voting districts as well as deleting old voting districts. Typically, a voting district is deleted by merging it with an adjacent voting district, so to make it, managing it better. And as I indicated, we have now submitted that to our national office for sign-off, and we're waiting for them. I must add, Chairperson, that in all in all the voting districts that are affected by the redelimitation, we do what we call targeted communicated registration in those particular areas to inform voters that the boundaries have changed and also possibly changes to voting stations. In this way, it's to ensure that the people on the ground are aware where their how their new voting district looks and where, if any, there's been a change in the voting station location. Speaking of voting stations, Chairperson, oops, I've stopped. Speaking of voting stations, Chairperson, we have already identified all our voting station sites. In other words, this can be a permanent building, it can be a school, it can be a creche, a church hall, or other venue. Or it can also be because of the fact that there is no infrastructure available. It can also be an open area site where we have to put up a temporary structure for the purposes of voting. But we've already gone through that process of identifying these, as well as to identify, the team had to identify at least one alternative site as well. Because as you know, Chairperson, it's very difficult. We are engaging with landlords, but given the fact that we just literally don't know when the election is going to be, it's very difficult to actually pin down a particular date. At the moment, we know that the window for elections is going to be between May and August next year, because the last election was on the 8th of May. And we need to we know that there will then be a 3-month window in which the president can choose to have the election. We've known from the last Constitutional Court case involving local government elections, where the court was very clear that the 5-year term is the 5-year term, and you do not extend that particular term beyond the particular 90-day period. So we prepare as best as we can by engaging with landlords generally around the voting station availability. But as I said, it's very difficult, Chairperson, because we don't actually know the date. It assists us if the date is on a Wednesday, because typically, for example, your community halls, etc., are available during the week and not necessarily over a Saturday. But nonetheless, we continue because that is a way that we've always done it, and we've always received very positive response from our identified landlords that we have to contract with. It's not just simply going to a venue. Irrespective of the nature of the venue, we actually enter into a contract with that particular landlord. Just some feedback with regard to voter registration, a quick comparison of where we were. For the local government elections, the certified voters roll, as it was on 26th of September 2021, we had 3.11930 registered voters in the province. That was out of a total of 26,204,000 nationally. I also indicate in the breakdown in terms of a male and female split there, Chairperson. You'll notice that we generally will always have more females who participate in these particular processes. And then the age breakdown, interesting enough, for 2021, you'll see there that the total number of voters that were under the age of 30, in effect, was 445,000, which is about 14.3% of the total voters in our province. Where we are currently, we are currently at a total of 3.089 million voters in the province. And of those, we have 390,156 are under the age of 30, which is about a 12.6% turnout. Now, typically, Chairperson, it is a natural phenomenon that the voters' roll will decrease between elections, primarily due to people passing away, deaths. A number of voters are removed every quarter, given as their deaths are reported at Home Affairs. And so you always have, when there's a break in between registration weekends and heightened activity on registration, a drop in registration, and then it will pick up as the closer we get to the elections. Just to, again, in terms of registration activity for the last financial year, we had a total of 66,418 registration activity. Now, registration activity, Chairperson, includes all activities around registration. It includes new registrations. It includes people that are moving. So you move from one area to another area and you're reapplying to update your details, either because you're in the same voting district still and you've done it, or you're coming from either a different town or a different part of the town and you are re-registering. So that is the overall registration activity. And of those 66,000, 34,293 was actually new registration. So it is picking up, and we continuously see this, especially because of the fact of our engagements at our schools. Online registration, Chairperson, this is a facility that the IEC produced, finalized in 2021, that allowed voters now, instead of waiting for a registration weekend when we open up our stations, a voter can go online, create their profile, and then register, or then update their registration details online. And for in the last year, we've had 24,770 of our citizens doing the registration activity, of which 12,700 were new registrations. So this is just giving citizens a third option. First option is you can visit the IEC office to register or re-register. Second, you can wait for a registration weekend, and the third is to do it online. So we are increasing the opportunities for South Africans to register or to re-register, as the case may be. The Commission has decided to hold 2 registration weekends prior to NPE. There will still be a formal notice by the Commission about the actual dates when that will be. But again, as I said, overall, bearing in mind that we're looking at what is happening with the electoral legislation and where that will be. So we are planning to have at least the registration weekends in this financial year, but the dates will then be communicated by the Commission formally once we have more clarity on the legislative changes and possible court challenges and how that will impact on the overall decision of when the election will be held next year. In terms of staff recruitment, we have started the recruitment process in this province for staff. We have approximately 74 staff members who are permanently in the Western Cape. There are a number of officers at my provincial office, and then in each municipality we have one person, and then we have the 5 districts officers as well. So that makes about 74. So what we normally do is, prior to the election, we start expanding our administrative capacity. This time around, all applicants will apply online. You register, you create your profile, you submit your CV, etc., and all the necessary documents. And then the person, once he or she is registered on our e-recruit system, can then apply for specific positions as they come and are available. We call this expansion staff. These consist of assistant project coordinators, APCs, which are based at our local offices, project-specific election support, which is at the provincial office, municipal outreach coordinators, as their name suggests, are also based in every municipality, and their role is then to coordinate a number of field workers for democracy education. These field workers are come in just before our registration weekend, and also just before then our election day, to ensure that we have a much more focused democracy education and balloting education campaign. We also have a number of other logistic support, including area managers. Area managers would be responsible for logistics function within a number of voting districts in a particular area, and they assist us closer to the registration and election with regard to our logistics, our distribution of material, etc. In that particular regard. So we have started this process, Chairperson. We hope that our APCs will start coming aboard from May and June. Similarly with our municipal outreach coordinators also by June. And then the area managers obviously will be later, but that will also depend on the actual date of the registration as announced by the Commission, which I indicated earlier. We also then will have the appointment of registration staff and electoral staff, which is also then planned to commence much later in the year, once we have our critical timeline finalized as well. But the idea is that we create the opportunity now ready for for all interested applicants to go online, create your profile, and then apply as and when positions become available. And these positions are across the province. We'll start the vetting of staff. We have our municipal PLCs, chairperson, our area managers, presiding officers, deputy presiding officers. Their names are presented to the local PLC at the municipal level, where political parties who are represented there have the opportunity to raise an objection to somebody, whether the person has a high profile or whatever the case may be, because we don't always know who the staff are. At the local level, so we provide our PLCs the opportunity then to raise an objection against somebody being appointed to work for us. We have a material stars team that develops our staff training material, and they already started reviewing all our training material. We plan in this province to have induction sessions with our expansion staff, as well as training boot camps. Now, the training boot camp is literally where we identify a number of our permanent staff to be our mainline trainers. They will then train trainers so that at the end of the day, we cover the training across the province for all our electoral staff, and we can have a uniform training information that is spread. So we have these boot camps. We're planning it to have around July, August, but again, it depends on the critical timeline around the legislation and how we can finalize that. Thank you very much. It's not moving. Sorry, it's not moving.
So we just have a slight technical issue here in the committee room.
Okay. We also then have, we're preparing to have a conflict management program, chairperson, primarily around managing disputes and issues as they arise on the ground. We will have a conflict management team based in this province. It will consist of a provincial coordinator who will be assisted by regional coordinators, one for each of the regions in our province, and then a number of what we call conflict panelists. These panelists are experienced mediators on the ground, and we will bring them in on a retainer basis, chairperson. So as and when a particular matter arises on the ground somewhere within the province, they get deployed to assist in trying to mediate a particular conflict situation. In many cases, the conflict may be around, for example, service delivery issues, which is not within our purview to resolve, but we will engage and try and make sure that the relevant people are there to engage with the community so that our elections can actually take place. Political parties, candidates will play a critical role in our conflict management, because unfortunately, in some cases, the conflict happens between two parties, candidates of parties, and we will normally engage with those political parties and their leadership to ensure that that they speak to their supporters or members to sort of de-escalate a particular matter. Our PLCs also play a particular role. I can mention, chairperson, that part of the Electoral Code of Conduct requires of political parties to cooperate with one another, especially when it comes to, for example, the hiring of venues, so that there's a better coordination. You do not want to have one meeting or two meetings at the same place at the same time. That creates a lot of unnecessary disputes, or the one meeting ends and the other one is starting right away. Now you have supporters from the one side meeting with the supporters leaving, and that. So those are matters that the political parties are also asked to assist us in terms of. From logistics side, there's a lot of logistics involved, a lot of material, bulk material. The procurement of bulk material for our registration is already underway. We're talking bulk materials, your stationery packs, your voting booths, the tables, the chairs, etc. These are bulk materials that we need to start already early on, and that process have already commenced. In terms of the procurement, we're almost closer to the finalization of that process, but we need to make sure that we start procuring all these materials, and then they get stored in our various warehouses across the country. Just with regard to the ballot, the paper for the ballots, we need to also start the process fairly early, Chairperson, because the bonded paper that we require and we use is actually imported nowadays. You need about a 3-month lead time around that. So we needed to start that process of procuring early enough, even though we don't know the size of the ballot, because that will be dependent on the number of contestants. We still need to just have the paper in the country, so that when we go to the printers, who are also allocated through a procurement process, we actually have the paper to give them and produce. Obviously, the size of our ballot will depend on the number of contestants. We can have anything from very few to close to 40. And I think in the last election we had 34 in this province. So the number of parties, and as I said, there will be independents as well, will then determine how our ballot paper looks at the end of the day. We are also already in the process in this province of identifying our local storage facilities. These are sort of temporary warehouse facilities that we need in our local municipal areas, because as the material becomes available, especially your bulk material, they have to be sent out to our municipalities as part of our network of distribution of these materials. A number of the other materials we will get closer to the actual event. For example, you have your security material such as seals, stamps, etc. That comes much later and follows a whole different distribution process, given the nature of the items that we have, Chairperson. Our voter management devices, members will recall that we introduced as the IEC the voter management device, which is a tablet that is used for both for registration of voters. In other words, we're not having a paper trail anymore. We simply scan the ID when you come there, and we ask you to give us your address, type that in, and the individual will then receive a SMS confirming that he or she has been registered, because we also ask that you give us a cell phone number. We are in the process of upgrading and updating our VMDs with new versions of the apps that we use on these VMDs. We have close to over 40,000 of them across the country. And so this is being managed at our national level to ensure that we have our VMDs are sort of battle ready by the time we deal with registration of voters. Also bearing in mind, we currently, because we have by-elections, we use these VMDs still. So in our municipal by-elections, but we, as I said, we're in the process of ensuring that all our devices are upgraded and are ready for when we deploy them en masse. Just from election management challenges, Chairperson, these are some of our challenges that we have. I refer to the fact that you have the delayed finalization of the legislative scheme for NPA, and that has a massive knock-on. As you know, we have a number of IT systems that we use for the conducting of our elections. For example, you have a candidate nomination system that we are already now in the process of having to start working on. We're not sort of just waiting for the final set of legislative requirements, but we have to start already by making provision for independence in whatever form and manner that they will appear. Similarly with the result system. In the past, we had the 2 ballots, and there was a way in which formulas were applied. And again, once those particular formulas and rules are set out in the legislation, they're currently set out in the draft or the draft Amendment Act. We'll also have to then update our results system. The delaying of our legislation also impacts on some of our training materials, as well as voter education materials, because we need to be able to say to people, this is what you will need or do, or how you will do it. And we need to ensure that we get that done. So one of the major sort of challenges that we have is in any delay in the finalization of the legislative scheme. Then, Chairperson, it's the bane of the whole country. It's the impact of load shedding on us. And we are equally affected by that. The Commission will be engaging with Eskom with regard to how they can manage load shedding, especially during the critical times of that election week. Bearing in mind, Chairperson, that from the IEC side, it's not only election day. We need our systems running because we have 2 days of special votes. We have a lot of distribution. We have all our systems that need to run. And then we have results capturing. Staff normally start capturing or counting the result after 9 o'clock through the night, and we need to capture that. So we're going to need electricity consistently over that whole period. So the Commission is engaging with Eskom with regard to that, but that is currently a concern. And even if we have an arrangement that we can have, for example, torches, and we have enough torches, but within the station, if the whole area is load shedded, people have to walk in the dark to get to a station. And even though we may have lighting within that particular station, so it is a concern and a major challenge facing us as a country, impact of load shedding. Breaches of the code of conduct by political parties and their members and supporters, that is always a challenge. This is especially around what happens at voting stations, where sometimes you have heightened contestation and voters may be subject to unnecessary attention as they approach a voting station. The purpose for political parties and candidates being at voting stations is really as temporary information facilities to assist voters, but sometimes it evolves into something which is quite unpleasant for a voter. Also political parties start trying to score cheap points against each other with regard to making different allegations, and we're really asking on political parties to please everybody play the game. Elections should be a contest and not anything more than a sort of contest between contestants. Impact of municipal by-elections, unlike with local government elections, Chairperson, where the municipal structures act says that, for example, 6 months before the general election for all municipalities, there is no more by-elections. There is no similar provision for NPE. Given our current situation where we've almost been for the last couple of months been having a by-election every month, you may actually have a situation that closer to the actual national elections, you also still have a ward by-election somewhere, which never mind us and the strain it puts on us to manage that sort of by-election, it also may create a bit of confusion for voters, because the voters going to say, but I voted last week, what do you want me to do again? The very next week, even, God forbid. But that is something that is a challenge. We also know that what may happen, Chairperson, around vacancies is when a councillor from Party A now becomes a candidate for Party B in the provincial election. So the party sees, oh, what's happening here? So they fire him, which creates a by-election. So, and that is something which also may become then a challenge if it becomes too many of it and it impacts on just people's understanding of participating in the elections. We will be ready to do it. That's not from us, from our side, but it's just the impact overall. Errors by voters during online registration, that's something that we are raising, Chairperson, because as I indicated, when you go online, you choose your address, and sometimes a voter may choose the incorrect address. When you're going on GPS, it typically, if you enter a street name, it gives you all the options for that street, and it's not necessarily limited to your area or even to your town. And if somebody makes a mistake of choosing the wrong, for example, if there's a beach road, you end up with a different beach road, and the voter on election day isn't disappointed and says, but why am I not registered here? I've always voted here. So we call on our voters and also with through the legislature, its members, to ensure that South Africans are always encouraged to check their voter registration details. Don't wait for election day. Check them now, update it, make sure that they are right. The online facility is available for voters to ensure that their the details are correct, so that they're not disappointed. And we end up with maybe a possible blame game that, yes, the IEC did this or not, or whatever the case may be. And sometimes it's also political parties who are assisting their supporters to register, make those errors. But the challenge is not to look at whose blame it is, but how do we manage it, Chairperson? And the best way is to ensure that we tell our voters, double check your details, Don't wait for election day, because then it will be too late to make changes to the voters roll. And the other message is that generally to our citizens out there, vote where you are registered. In the past, NPE, national elections, you could pitch up anywhere because the ballot paper was the same in the whole country. And as long as you showed that you were a registered voter. In 2021, the Electoral Act was changed to now require a voter to give notification to the IEC prior on a prior date in terms of the timetable to say, look, I will not be in Joburg, I'm going to be in Cape Town or whatever. Because typically what will happen, Chairperson, is we will prepare for a voting station. Say there's 800 voters there on the voters roll. So we will have equal number of ballot papers and some buffer stock and our staff for that particular station. But now what happens is, because people think that it's quicker at the station, now they all come to one station, and that overwhelms the staff, and we need to start moving ballot papers around. So it does create a bit of a logistical logjam. So the legislation was amended in 2021 already to ensure that if you are going to not be in your voting district on election day, you must give us a prior notification. And as normal, Chairperson, if you are registered voter in Gauteng and you happen to be in Cape Town or Western Cape or anywhere, you will only get the national ballot. You're not going to get a provincial ballot for Gauteng to vote in the Western Cape, because we won't have Gauteng, because the ballots will be different. Parties that contest in Gauteng is different from parties that contest in the Western Cape or from any of the 9 provinces or regions. So again, we ask on members to ensure that that information is also communicated effectively. We will do it from our side as well. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hendrickse. Members, I'm going to ask, are there any questions? Member Pretorius has one. Are there any hands online?
Chair, I'm trying to raise my hand, but for some reason it's not giving me that option. But I would also like to ask a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Dugmore. I will start with Member Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair. That one. Yeah. Thank you. Chair, thank you, through you to Mr. Hendrickse. Thank you, Mr. Hendrickse. Unless I missed something, you mentioned 3 ballots, being the provincial legislature, the NA. What is the third one, please? Unless I missed it, you did mention about the 200 reps to the NA. Then just easily, in terms of your school's democracy program, what is the response? Is there an indication of the level of response by the learners in terms of actually registering as opposed to just attending and things like that? So, and then just in terms of the delimitation, you referred to the review that has been completed. I presume that is final. The review and that the delimitation is complete as far as the elections next year is concerned. And then lastly, and this is not a trick question, I know that you have referred to the matter of the legislation. What is the shortest period between the legislation being approved and the elections being held that would enable you to be ready for the elections? Point is, if this were to come through in May next year, we're not going to have elections in May next year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Pretorius. Member Dugmore, can you hear me?
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. Also, thank you very much to Mr. Hendrickse for the presentation. I just have a number of questions. The first one is in regard to the issue of special votes and the IEC's attitude towards requests for information. And briefly, the context is that our political party had objected to the allegations around manipulation of special votes in the Cedarburg by-election. The objection was discussed and dealt with by the IEC nationally, who indicated that there would not have been a material impact on the outcome, and therefore did not entertain the actual objection. But the issue is that we then asked for information concerning correspondence requesting special votes, and there was absolutely no response from the IEC. So what I would like to ask Mr. Hendricks, is it necessary for parties then to use the prior legislation to try and get, for example, the application of a party for special votes? Is that what is necessary, or will the IEC cooperate with what is essentially just a request for information? That's the first one. And then linked to that is what is actually the process of the IEC when they receive applications for special votes, especially, for instance, if they get lots of applications for younger people. Does there have to be a motivation from those applying for special votes that people are away from the area, or do they specifically have to provide information in regard to someone's disability and therefore requesting a home visit? So if you could just be updated on that. Then the second issue relates to access to the farms. If Mr. Hendricks could just give us what the IEC in the Western Cape is doing to actually work with the Department of Labour, Organised Agriculture, as well as the political parties to ensure access to farms. This remains a big problem in our province, with gates often being closed before voting stations closes, and the fundamental right in our constitution, one of the fundamental rights, the right to democratic expression through voting, we believe is being undermined. So I would like to ask, what are the proactive steps that are being taken by the IEC to ensure that every person actually has the right to register and actually to vote? And then the fourth issue relates to the dignity required in an election. We know that in our province and in the country as a whole, the quality of the infrastructure varies from more established suburbs, which often have very well maintained halls. They have covering in case of rain, place to park, etc., etc. And I would like to ask whether there is a policy from the IEC to specifically allocate additional resources to those voting stations which, for instance, do not have cover from the rain. The issue of what is the requirement to ensure that there are extra voting lines in particularly densely populated areas, because very often there is a situation where people have to wait for very long. That discourages voters from going, especially if there's not a comfortable environment and an environment which offers some protection from the elements. And I believe that additional resources is one way of dealing with the historical inequalities. And then second last question would be, what is the actual process to object to presiding officers or any other officials that have been appointed? When is that likely to happen, and when would parties have the opportunity to object to positions that have been advertised and then proposed to be filled? If we could just have an explanation about that. And then the last question is in regard to code of conduct investigations. We specifically asked the IEC, arising from the Cedarburg Wuppertal by-election to investigate the conduct of a member of a political party for a breach of the code of conduct, but that particular issue was simply ignored, and there was only a response in regard to the issue of whether the special votes issue would have impacted on the outcome of the election. But so, although we requested an investigation into the conduct of the particular political party, you know, the IEC did not respond to that at all. So what does one do in a situation where you've asked for an investigation into the code of a breach, alleged breach of a code of conduct by a member of a political party during an election, in this case a by-election, and there's been no response from the IEC to that particular issue? I'm just concerned because the lack of access to information, you know, goes against the spirit of transparency, which we think is important in regard to all matters related to the arranging and organizing of free and fair elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Dugmore. I'm going to ask Mr. Hendrickson to reply to those questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I'll start and remind me in case I miss one of them, but I think I've got them all. The 3 ballots, as I indicated, you have 400 seats in the National Assembly. 200 is for your compensatory list and 200 is reserved for your regions. So each region will have a set number of seats allocated to it in the National Assembly, and that's based on the number of voters in that. So, for example, in the Western Cape can send 23 representatives to the National Assembly. So what will typically now happen is, given the fact that you may have independents, is that you have a compensatory list, which political parties are there, and then you have regional ballots. Now, because your independents or political parties who choose to, for example, contest in the Western Cape is different from, say, Gauteng or Northern Cape, etc., you're going to need a different ballot. And that's where in the past, there was no distinction made between the national ballot. There was one ballot, and we simply counted the votes coming that were for the national ballot in the Western Cape, for example, and we allocated the number of representatives from the province, region to national. And then the third ballot is your provincial. So it's really around the regional ballot, if you want to put it that way, where the third ballot actually now comes in. And as I said, that particular matter is still subject to the final. We don't know how the requirements of who will be on that ballot and how it will be set out, but that literally is where we're talking about 3 ballots. You will recall that in local government election outside of metros, the municipalities also receive 3 ballots, you know, district. So to a certain extent, some of our voters are aware about a 3 ballot process, but we still need to make sure that for national and provincial, people are then informed about the 3 ballots. But as I indicated, that once the whole scheme is finalized, we can deal with it. In terms of the response by schools, just some of the data I have around, there's been a lot of positive responses from especially learners around. So in the 2020-21 year, where we only had 120 engagements. That was 2 years ago. We had reached over 4,100 young people at these schools. In 2021-22, when we had 212 schools we visited, the response was 8,400. So the responses are there and they are good. Always the challenge is one, that you need to continue with the engagement around it. You know, it's not a once-off. And that is why we're also working with the Department of Education to see how this is incorporated into the life orientation subject. You call it subjects, so that it's on democracy education is more than just about voting, because our democracy is not only a representative one, but also participatory in the sense that, you know, citizens can participate through ward committees, through IDPs, etc. You know, there's a whole participatory way of doing things. So the overall response has been good, and we're hoping to just extend that particular process of engagement. The big challenge, however, is when it comes to the actual reasons of understanding why young people are disengaging. Not apathy, but disengage. Apathy means you don't care, and I don't think young people don't care. I think they care enough about poverty, work, employment, safety, climate, everything, and sexual abuse. So it's about the disengagement and why, and that is a challenge which primarily lies with the contestants in election. About what are you putting out there as an offering to voters and to young people in particular. With the delimitation, this is our process that we have. As I said, it is not submitted to our national office. Once there'll be a delim set that we finalize, and then that's going to be it that we're going to use for the election. As I indicated, the MDB is also still busy with their process because they'll deal with outer boundaries, the municipality boundaries, then they'll get to the ward boundaries. And if any of those ward boundaries will then cut through our voting district when they rework it, that may impact also on our delimitation process. But in terms of the consultation process with our PLCs, we done that level of engagements. And it will only be if something now from national office says that for a particular reason this is not a feasible option, but we have to go back, etc. But that's where we are with that. Yes, legislation being offered and the date of elections, I really can't give you that particular sort of window that we have. That is something which is at a national level has to be discussed and determined in terms of our critical timeline. When is the last possible date by which or else? I think we ultimately will have elections, but I think it's the quality of elections will be affected. It's not the fact we will not have, but it's the quality of the experience of the voter. If depending on how tight the timeline, gets. Yeah, with regard to special votes, I'm aware of that, and I'm aware that the Commission had considered the objection by Mr. Dugmore's party, and there was a response to it. If there is generally request for information, we would ask that parties do it through the PAIA process. There's a number of reasons for doing that rather than simply saying I want information, and that's why we have a legislative scheme, and you can ask for that particular information through PAIA, through a PAIA application. The issue of what is the process for special votes? Yeah, as it stands, the legislation requires the person to make a affirmation that he or she request a home visit. Now, the home visit is different from the voting station visit. The home visit is where somebody says, look, due to my disability or medical condition, I just cannot visit the station. That is your home visit. In other words, we come to your home. In other cases, a person simply says, look, I can't get to the voting station on election day. I'll come the day before. That's a special vote at the station. And what Mr. Dugmore is referring to is these home visits and I think he refers to young people. Now we don't ask for additional proof from anybody in terms of saying what is because that may put an additional burden on our people. If you now need to go create a medical certificate before you can actually apply for a home visit or etc. So it's difficult for us. We literally go on what persons are asking us to do, and we have been looking at the process of how applications takes place, and what measures we can put in without adding too much of a burden with regard to how the application takes place. It is always a case that where there is an abuse of a process, it's generally not just the voter that does so, but it is a matter of concern, and this was a matter that you also discussed at the Provincial PLC. We actually had a workshop where one of the topics was around, special vote applications, how we manage that particular process. But we don't actually ask for additional proof because that will create an additional burden for somebody to go and now get a doctor's certificate or whatever the case may be. In terms of access to farms, that is a continuous issue. In the run-up to the previous election, I did have an engagement with the Agri Western Cape around access to farms generally, and they have a protocol. We have also, as the IEC, engaged with Agri National around ensuring that there's access to farms. In fact, the provision around access to is not only limited to farms; it's property generally. And the requirement is that it's reasonable access. In other words, you can't simply pitch up at a farm or a factory or whatever. You make some arrangement prior to that particular situation, and that is something which we encourage all parties to do with particular whether it's a farmer, owner of a premises, or where you need to be at, is to make prior arrangements of it. Where such it is felt that such access is unreasonably denied, it does become a criminal offence, and a party is entitled to actually go lay a charge at the police services around that, because ultimately it is for the court then to adjudicate on offences, whether they are breaches of the code of conduct or the or criminal offences in terms of the act. In 2021, I believe, I stand corrected, but there was a judgment by the Supreme Court of Appeals. Specifically, the case was Electoral Commission versus Democratic Alliance and others, where the issue was about what are the powers of the Commission to adjudicate and impose sanctions when it comes to breaches of the code of conduct and offences. And the court was very clear that the IEC doesn't have any jurisdiction to adjudicate these particular matters or to impose any sanctions. We can't even ask somebody to apologize, Chairperson. We don't have the sanction. It is a matter which has to be adjudicated by a court. You have the electoral court, which offers swift and easy access to people, or any other court that has the jurisdiction. And we encourage people then to lay that charge, whether it's at the police station, so that the ordinary course can follow its course. But unfortunately, as the IEC, even to the extent that we investigate anything, we can't actually impose any. We can't even make a call on who is at fault, or whatever the case may be. And that judgment has also been shared with the provincial PLC members. So to that extent, we ask that where these offences are alleged to have occurred, that members of the public party members lay their charges or go to the electoral court to ask for an appropriate sanction. The electoral court is the one that can impose a fine, can deregister a party, which means that you lose all your seats, etc. It can even disqualify a candidate from contesting. But those are the powers which is reserved for a court as it currently stands. I support Member Dugmore with regard to the dignity of voting. It's something which is our reality, unfortunately, where we sit with IEC doesn't operate in the vacuum when it comes to our infrastructure, historical or current reasons for such a situation that we have. And it is unfortunate, of the 1,577 voting stations, I think in the last election we had 35 with temporary structures. This is where we have to put up a tent. There is just nothing there, either because it's a new development and there's no hall or school yet in that particular area that we can use, or it's, for example, an informal settlement that is just further expanded, and again there's literally no infrastructure available. And we try and limit it. We try to move it down a little bit. In the last election, we looked at how we could even consider having a better temporary structure, like a prefab temporary mobile home type situation. And that's something, again, that we will look to see to what extent we can look at a better temporary structure, because we typically will use tents that go up and have to be removed the day after the voting. We will have, for example, where we know that it's a large voting station. In terms of large, when I say, sorry, not station, the district, in terms of the number of voters, we will have streaming, where we will not have just one tent. We will actually put up a number of sort of tents, just like we do as a voting center at a school, Chairperson, where there's a large number. We start breaking up the voters' roll and saying, okay, people from A to D, you go to classroom A, classroom D, C. So we actually do that, and we have that facility, and we'll be looking more closer to that particular process as well. How do we enforce streaming to ensure that the people that are normally the most vulnerable, living in the most difficult of conditions, also have a dignified of voting? I think it's just fair that we have a similar experience of voting across the province and across the country, for that matter, and that is something definitely that we will continue to engage with around potential service providers or even municipalities to see to what extent we can get assistance in terms of those particular matters. Then the process to object to a presiding officer. This is at the local level, at the Municipal Party Liaison Committee, where parties are represented. The names are presented. Once we have the short list, and we intend to appoint presiding officers or deputy presiding officers, and now also area managers, we present it to the PLC. We have their names, and they are given opportunity to come back to us with a substantive objection. You can't just say, no, I don't want Michael because I don't like him. There has to be a reason, because we have to put it to the applicant also why he will, the objection and the grounds for it. So to that extent, but there is, it simply has to be sort of raised in writing by at the local PLC meeting, and it is done prior to when we start deploying people to the voting stations or registration stations. Because the most difficult thing, Chairperson, is that on election day, when we are confronted with an allegation that says, oh, Mr. X is got a profile, why is he working there? We ask parties to come to us earlier and raise these particular matters, and hence we give them a chance. Here's the names. We don't ask you right away. We'll give you at least about a week or so, depending on the timeline we're working on, to come back to us, because parties will have their local structures and they will know people. And we obviously also do our own vetting, Chairperson, especially around criminal checks on our presiding officers. We do that through a formal process. Other staff, like our expansion staff, they also go through the typical vetting process that we will do through employment. When you are employed, they're not as detailed, but we still do it through a outside service provider in terms of their suitability for this. Code of conduct, again, I'm not aware that you asked for that investigation. I'm aware of the Mr. Dugmore, about the objection that was lodged and the response to you from in terms of that particular commission, yeah. So as I earlier indicated, also the next steps for you, if you want to follow up on that particular concern on offence or alleged breach, is you could approach then, for example, the electoral court, which is fairly easy to access, or to lay a criminal charge. Bearing in mind that the people that know will have the evidence. We will not necessarily have the evidence to lay the charge, but the person that has experience it will have the evidence to actually then lay the charge for further investigation by the SAPS. As I indicated earlier, Chairperson, that was also the reason why I engaged with SAPS, the Provincial Commissioner and his legal team. It's around making sure that at stations, at police stations, police people are aware about these offences, so that when members of the public lay charges, they are aware that they must be investigated as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Abramson. Sorry, Hendrickson. My apologies. Oh, sorry about that, Mr. Hendrickson. Any follow-up questions? Nothing from Member Pretorius? Nothing from Member Dugmore? I just have one question. Yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
it's just actually, if you don't mind, a slightly new question. I want to thank Mr. Hendrickson for the comprehensive response, and the process which he has outlined. And I think, Chair, it would be a very good idea in a couple of months, to ask Mr. Hendrickson or someone from the IEC to brief the committee again. But I would just like to ask Mr. Hendrickson for his view. The IEC these days also has to get involved in matters of local government, often very complex matters when, for instance, parties, submit lists to the IEC of their candidates, and then the IEC or the MM receives further communication in regard to that particular party having, for example, removed the number one and replaced that person with another candidate. Now, I'm not sure whether Mr. Hendrickson is able to comment on what is the current situation in Oudtshoorn, where we understand that the member of a particular party, in this case, what is referred to as the Saamstaan Party, is currently in jail, serving a sentence charged with an offence related to sexual assault, as I understand it, and that his party has informed the MEC, the MM, and everyone about the fact that they have changed their list. And my information is that up to now, the MM concerned has not responded within 2 weeks as required, and neither has the MEC. So there's a situation now where the number one on their list is in jail. And secondly, the party concerned has requested to change, and then the relevant authorities in terms of the legislation, in the MM in particular, has not responded as our information has it. What is the role of the IEC in Mr. Hendricks's view in a situation like this? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dugmo. I'd rather not comment on the specifics of this particular matter, Mr. Dugmo, because it's a long-running issue. It it's coming on for some time. But just speaking generally, I think this is the bane of my life when it comes to the issue of especially your smaller parties, or where there's disputes within parties, where different factions will now start putting forward and saying, oh, we had a meeting and we fired Mr. X. And then another person comes, actually, no, we've had a meeting and we fired Miss Y, or this is the new rep, etc. And given the fact of the nature of that particular dispute, the first thing, so when it comes to internal or intra-party disputes, the Electoral Commission Act has actually been amended to ensure that the Electoral Court has jurisdiction now to deal with intra-party disputes. And when we receive these sort of conflicting sort of correspondence, the view of the Commission, which was upheld by the Electoral Court even recently, is that we work with who is the registered leader of the party, and if there's any challenge to that, or if there's any dispute, there was a judgment in the Eastern Cape also that simply said, look here, you either accept or you go to court and you challenge. And that is our approach as well. If you are unhappy, go to the Electoral Court. As I said, it's a very straightforward, easy access court that you can have, which has a status of a high court. Or if your legal rep wants to go the more expensive route, you can do that. But have the court decide, because you will then be able to present whatever evidence you have about who is the real leader or the constitutionally valid leader, or whatever the case may be. So that's the first part, Mr. Dugmo. We always say to parties, go to the court. We are not going to take sides. We keep with what we have on our books, and until the court then tells us something else. And it's involved a number of parties, both at national level right down to local level, to the extent that we get to a situation, Chairperson, that we simply say to a party, sorry, we're not accepting list of candidates for election because we don't know who to take it from. There's two people coming with lists, and we say, until a court tells us who's the appropriate authorized representative, we can't assist you. When it comes to vacancies in local councils, the Structures Act is very clear, Mr. Chair. It says that the responsibilities on the municipal manager to inform the IEC of a vacancy. And if the municipal manager doesn't do it, the MEC must within 14 days, or can within 14 days, if he doesn't or she doesn't do that, the MEC for local government in the province can inform the IEC of a vacancy. So once we get informed of that vacancy, that triggers our responsibility. We do not deal with the causes of vacancies. We don't come and say, okay, we will now declare a vacancy. Our responsibility in terms of the law is limited to filling of a vacancy. So what will typically happen is the MM will inform us, the municipal manager will inform us in writing and say, look, this is what the situation. We will then engage with that party and look at who's on the books for us as the registered leader or authorized representative, and then receive a revised candidates list from that particular individual that's so authorized, and then we proceed to do it. Now a lot of times what happens is, once the vacancy, for example, either a members of a party will approach us as the IEC and say, please declare the vacancy. Firstly, we can't do it as the IEC. That's not our statutory function. Secondly, once a vacancy is there, then members of different factions will come to us and say, here's a list, here's a list, here's a list. And again, we then go with the authorized rep. And we say, if you're not happy with who the authorized registered leader is of the party, go to court. Let the court tell us. We've had a number of, there's been one or two very long-standing disputes like that at the national level. Chairperson, not even a local party, at the national, one of our well-known parties has been, for the last couple of years, been involved in a dispute. You know, it's court case in, appeal, lose appeal, go to higher court, appeal, whatever. So that is really where we are now, and we really ask that parties just keep to the rules. If somebody's aggrieved because a municipal manager or the MEC hasn't declared the vacancy, you have to approach a court and ask the court to order the MEC or MM, as the case may be, to declare that particular vacancy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oh, wait. Index. Wanted to make doubly sure that I got that right. Thank you for your questions, Member Pretorius and Member Dugmore. If I've got a couple of questions, but I don't think you can answer them now. So I think maybe what we'll do is once we have the legislation done, I think closer to the time we will ask that you come to the committee and we will talk, because I want to talk about Plan Bs and contingency plans, and I don't think I need to go into that now, but I think we'll go into that closer to the time. And the lessons learned from the local government election of 2021. So I think we'd leave that over. If there's no further questions, thank you very much, sir. Do you have a closing remark?
No, thank you very much for the opportunity, Chairperson. And I look forward to re-engaging with the committee. It is a bit early days, but at least I've given you some sort of overview. And for example, once we get more clarity, for example, I'll have a critical timeline for you, where I can say, look here, this must happen by a particular date. It may even answer honourable member there around what is the window of opportunity that we may have. So I will definitely look forward to coming back to the committee at a later stage, Chairperson. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. You are excused. I'll give you just a minute to get your stuff. Get your definite general. I hope you're not going to back to Balbal in this traffic now.
Unfortunately, I have to.
Oh, good luck to you, sir.
But yeah.
Members, Member Dugmore, I am mindful of your request to put that item under general. I would just like to deal with a consideration and adoption of the draft committee meeting minutes of 15th of March 2023. It was distributed via the calendar entry by the procedural officer. I'd like to go through page 1. If there's any omissions or additions. Page 2. If there's no any further, can I have a mover for the minutes, please? Member Pretorius? Member Dugmore?
Yeah, second. If Mr. Pretorius is moving, I would second.
Thank you so much. On to the resolutions and actions, and yeah, the resolutions and actions that are outstanding, that there has been information disseminated from the procedural officer for the copy of the employment equity plan that was requested, a report on the availability of public Wi-Fi, a cost breakdown of each project relating to the 85 million rand energy allocation, and the list of public libraries that is not connected to the Western Cape government broadband network. So that has been disseminated to everybody. What I also have done, members, Member Dugmore, to answer, to have your point. Would you like to further expand on the point of the Environmental Commissioner before I say what I've done so far?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Chair, I think as we know, there is going to be a process initiated by the Speaker in terms of introducing a bill to amend the provincial constitution in regard to the size of the legislature. And I presume that process, which is now out of our hands, is going to commence soon, and it is also going to involve public consultation. At the same time, while we recognize that you have, as the chair, been fairly recently appointed, I think the committee coordinator and others can provide a very long history about the other amendment to the provincial constitution, which has come to our committee's attention from the Department of the Premier. And that amendment, as we all know, deals with general amendments around local government provisions in the constitution. And when it comes to the Children's and Provincial Commissioner, proposed an amendment which states that the appointment of these commissions will be voluntary as opposed to it being compulsory as it currently stands. Now, our concern is that, from looking at the previous minutes, there were issues around inviting the national minister and so on. My view, Chair, is that we've been through all of these issues, and I think it really has reached a point now where we need to take these proposed amendments, formally. We'd already had a number of public hearings all over. There was vast support for maintaining the provisions that there shall be an environmental commission. So we had about 6 or 7 public hearings on that issue. Then you became the chair, and I'm just afraid that the process now is held up. And I wanted to ask what is holding the committee back now to, as we would normally do when we have a piece of a draft, a bill before us, to actually either conclude this matter and then make recommendations as the committee, because we've actually had public hearings already on this matter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Dagmo. So I could answer you with two points that have been done. I've been advised by the procedural office that because there are quite a few new members of the committee, that we call the department in to update us as to what exactly the status is regarding the environment and legislation and plans thereof.
Sorry, Chair, had you finished? Sorry.
No, I haven't finished. And the second thing is that at the Water Day, at the World Water Indaba, which was held on the 22nd of March, the Western Cape government unveiled a 15-year integrated drought and water response plan. And that was news to me. So what I've done is I've engaged the Minister of Local Government, Environmental Affairs and Development Planning's office to come and explain to us what exactly that plan entails and how that plan will be managed from his office. So that's what I've done so far. And yes, I'm mindful of the fact that I've joined relatively recently, but that doesn't preclude us from the fact that you're right. We have to conclude this matter. But I just want to make sure that all members are aware of where we stand at the present. Member Bosman, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, I think as a good way forward, the briefing would be helpful, but I think I want to support Member Dagmo's call for some action on this. And this committee made a decision that it was going to invite the National Minister of Environmental Affairs, Minister Barbara Creasy, to brief us on the response from National in terms of what National is doing, to also give us some insight into what her department thinks the Western Cape government is already doing, and also to share with us the minister's thoughts on whether there's a need for an environmental commissioner. So I think maybe we can, as a next step, get that ball rolling and get Minister Creasy to come and brief the committee on what the national department is doing, and also what their position is on a provincial commissioner for the environment, specifically as it relates to NEMA as well. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you, Member Bosman.
Chair?
Yes,
sorry,
Member Dugmore?
I can't raise my hand. I'm
Yes, I
sorry
thought you
about
were
that.
going to. No
Yeah,
worries.
no, Chair, could I just, in addition to what you have said and what Member Bosman has said, I think we must just separate a few issues here. The one is that it is this committee's responsibility to deal with the bill that proposes amendments to the provincial constitution. Those amendments include the issue of the environmental commissioner, but there's also a number of other issues, including aligning the provincial constitution, with certain changes that have happened, the issue of what the provincial constitution says about its role in regard to local government. So on the one hand, we need, for the sake of possibly new members and so on, for the Department of the Premier to come and brief us on the bill itself, just to update members. So that's a Department of the Premier briefing. Then I don't have any issue with your proposal that the Department of Environmental Affairs and Local Government, falling under the MEC, comes and briefs the committee about, that integrated water resilience plan, and that if, as the committee has decided, to invite the minister or someone from the national department. But it would make sense to me to have all of those briefings kind of on one day, because essentially they do go around the issue of the environmental commissioner, the the issue of the amendments to the constitution, because those amendments, if they come and explain, you would see that they're not only related to whether the appointment of the two commissions, the Chapter 9 institutions in our province, they fall under Chapter 9 of the provincial constitution, but they also deal with amendments to clauses related to oversight and monitoring of local government. So Chair, my suggestion is that we actually get the Department of Premier, we get the environmental affairs people, and then, as committee previously decided, as Member Bosman says, invite the minister or representative from the national department. So it just would make sense to me to have that on one day. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Member Dugmore. What I will do is I'll have that discussion with the procedural officer, and then once again familiarize with what the committee has done, and then we'll get all those relevant departments, like I said, in a room together, hopefully on the 28th of April. That's our next meeting. But the meeting, the requests will go out shortly from the procedural office, and then we will get everyone in the room, and we will try to bring this matter to finality. Thank you very much. Are there any further resolutions or actions, members?
Chair, no, I would just propose that we write to the ISC and thank the Provincial Electoral Officer for the presentation. I'm not sure if that's protocol or if we don't do that, but if we don't normally do it, then we can just leave it. Yeah.
No, I think that's a good idea, Member Dugmore. We will send a letter of thanks to them and say that we look forward to another briefing once the legislation has been tabled and ascended. Any further resolutions or actions? In that case, thank you to Member Pretorius for keeping me company, keeping me in the procedural officer company. Thank you to our translators who've stayed behind and added their services. Thank you to Members Dugmore and Member Bosman online, and I hope to see you fairly at the next meeting, and you'll be properly appraised as to anything happens between the times. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members and staff members. Thank you. Number one.